Welcome to Pop Culture Retro, which was recently voted the 15th best podcast by the residents of the Golden Years Retirement Community in Boca Raton, Florida. Each show, we'll revisit some of your favorite pop culture memories with insider and outsider perspectives. Now, please help me welcome your hosts, Ike Eisenmann and Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Retro. I'm one of your hosts, Jonathan Rosen, along with Ike Eisenmann. And today we are thrilled to welcome a writer, producer, director, winner of numerous awards, including 3 Emmys, recipient of a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, produced specials for such legendary entertainers like Frank Sinatra, Judy Garland, and someone who I'm quite fond of, Cher. He also created shows like Real People and the groundbreaking series Laugh-In, author of the memoir Still Laughing, A Life in Comedy. Please help us welcome George Schlatter. George, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Well, we have so much to cover, and we'll probably have to jump around a bit because you had such an unbelievable career. But to start, I was reading your fascinating memoir, Still Laughing, A Life in Comedy. So many great stories in there, but you grew up in a performing family. Your mother was a concert violinist.
Yes.
Did she instill a love of theater in you?
Yes, and humor. She was also a very funny woman. She was a great sense of humor, and she was one of the people that taught me that no matter what goes wrong, you can laugh at it, and that's how I survived.
That's true.
Wow. Well, you both were involved in opera, but you mentioned how you learned a lot about comedy from a burlesque theater, which was down the road. Can you talk a little about that and how that helped shape your comedic sensibilities?
St. Louis Municipal Theater was an outdoor theater, and we would do a show a week, but we would have like a 2-hour break for dinner, and so we would always go down the street to the burlesque house because I was fascinated with those guys, and they were funny. They looked at life in a wonderful way, which I adopted, and it's helped me to survive. The burlesque, visiting the burlesque theater and listening to my mother are 2 of the reasons I was able to survive it.
That's quite a contrast.
But I want to warn you, I'm 94 years old and I may repeat myself, or did I already tell you that? Okay, go ahead.
Well, you have a great story about managing a singer on the show, Search for Girls, and the writer on that show came to you. Do you mind sharing that story with everyone?
Well, yeah, we were auditioning dancers and so forth, and one of the writers came and said, "There's a girl dancing down in a special, Andy Griffith special. You got to go see her." I said, "I'm not using dancers. I'm using comics." So anyway, I went down, and here was this adorable girl dancing, and she said, "I'm a dancer. I'm not a comic." And I said, "Well, come on upstairs." And we gave her an introduction to do, and it was so screwed up, it was unbelievable. And so she said, "I'll do it again." We said, "No, that'll be just fine." And from then on, we never let this girl rehearse or learn the lines. It was Goldie. And we realized Goldie was perhaps one of the brightest people I've ever worked with. But if she made a mistake, she laughed. And that laugh was gold. And she did a lot to the show.
Wow.
And who was the writer? But the writer approached you to manage him as well. That's
Aaron. Oh, yeah, it was a talent show. They were doing the Ada Leonard show, and Aaron Spelling was the band boy. And I was going to this little coloratura. She kept winning every week. And Aaron came to me and said, "Look, we're not going to have a final runoff here if this girl keeps winning." So we had to get her off for 2 or 3 weeks. Anyhow, Aaron and I became very good friends. And he said, "We ought to go into business together." Want to see one of life's great decisions, not going into business with Aaron Spelling? If I'd gone into business with Aaron Spelling, I wouldn't have to be doing this. But it was great. We wound up good friends for a long time. Boy, was he a good guy.
Well, it's a Hollywood cliche now to have someone starting out in the mailroom and working their way up, but that really happened to you at MCA. How did that come about, and how did you get your big break from that?
Well, I started out well below the mailroom. Anyway, I was a plumber, electrician. I was a cement finisher. I did all kinds of things. Until I finally got upgraded to a job in the mailroom.
But it was Sinatra who got you out of who helped you with the mailroom? It was Sinatra that
No, the Sinatra was another thing. My Sinatra was at MCA and I was in the mailroom, and they came in. He came in the building, and everybody in the building followed him into this office. And I was in there, and everybody's in black but me. I was in a gray gabardine suit, and he came in the room, and I was standing there, and he looked at me and he says, "Wow, I have ties older than this guy, right?" He said, "Is this okay?" And he had the contract they'd given him, which was a massive contract that meant that he didn't pay commission, but just by representing Frank Sinatra, they sold so many other artists. And he showed me this contract. He said, "Is this okay?" I'm 19 years old. I said, "Yeah, that's okay." That's when he said, "I have ties older than this guy." And he went out, and my relationship with Sinatra was dotted with moments like that through a long, long, long and illustrious relationship, which is dotted with humor up until his wife asked me to do a eulogy at his funeral, right? And it was a terrifying experience. And so it went okay, but doing a eulogy at Sinatra's funeral, and then I was introduced by a bishop, and I said, "Thank you, Your Honor." I'd met a lot more judges than bishops, and so that cracked it up, and Frank laughed, and I thought Frank was going to sit up in the box, and so, but the ability to laugh is part of how we can survive, even where we are right now. We can survive. That's why I wrote this book. I'm still laughing. That has got me in and out of more trouble than anything I could possibly do, is being able to laugh about it. Ultimate pain. They realize when you are the ultimate pain, when something hurts so bad you can't do anything about it, people laugh. And laughter is the panacea. Laughter is the great Novocaine of life, is laughter. So that's why I sat down to write just funny incidents that have happened to me over my long and suspicious career, because being able to laugh got me in and out of more trouble than anything else. So I decided to put together a book that combined all of my episodes, all of my adventures in and out of trouble, and they were all funny. And so somebody said, "Well, didn't anything happen to you other than funny?" And I said, "I hope not." So that's why I wrote Still Laughing, and I am.
It's a great memoir. One of the things that was mind-blowing to me was that you're responsible for the Vegas Lounge Act. How did you work with coming up with that?
Well, I wound up booking acts at Ciro's on the Sunset Strip, and then I wound up from there booking acts into Vegas. And at that point, there was a 20% tax if you saw entertainment. You could play music, but if you saw any kind of entertainment, you had to pay 20% tax. So there was this act, Mary Kay Trio, who were friends of mine, and I booked them into the Frontier Hotel, but they couldn't play where the people could see them. So I put a screen up, a curtain up, and they could play and you could hear them, but you couldn't see them. So I then decided to get rid of that screen, and it caused all kinds of commotion, but it was the end of the 20% tax, and they went on to become big act. And that went on to become the backbone of much of entertainment in Vegas. Was those lounge acts could go on until 2 o'clock in the morning. And Mary Kay Trio was the first lounge act you could see, and I booked them. So that's one of my suspicious credits.
That's incredible. Oh my God. And also you laundered money for the gangster Mickey Cohen.
Well, now see, I knew I should just stay with laughing rather than that. I met Mr. Cohen, and I was at Ciro's, and every week they would deliver a box, right? And I'd give them $1,000, and the box had tissue paper in it, but it was a way of laundering money. And my brother had a clerical job with the FBI, and he said they never knew where Mickey Cohen got the money. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to tell you, but I knew where he got the money, because I gave him I bought this box."
Well, in your book, you write very lovingly of your wife, Jolene Brand. She had been in shows such as Ernie, Kovacs, and Zorro. So how did you meet her to begin with? And you also wrote that her career on Kovacs helped influence Laughing?
Oh, enormously. Jolene was queen of the Los Angeles County Fair when she was 17 years old. One of the prizes was they got a job at the Sands Hotel in Vegas. When she arrived, she realized she was 17 years old and couldn't work in Vegas. So she was kind of shielded from all of that. But she got to know all of those people too. And then I met her, and I mean, you had to meet this woman. She still is gorgeous. But one night we were with Ernie Kovacs, and he saw Jolene, who was just beautiful and loved Ernie. And so Ernie put her on as his leading lady on his series. And she never knew what she was going to do. Ernie didn't know what he was going to do, but he was wonderfully whimsical and visual and crazy. And so Jolene became his leading lady, and we would spend endless hours with Ernie trying to figure out what it was he was doing. Anybody who wants a good time ought to find a tape of Ernie Kovacs. He was a delightful human being. And we spent a lot of time with Ernie. And Jolene, that was Jolene's major credit. She did Guessworth Ho and Gunsmoke and so forth, but her life with Ernie Kovacs was part of our wonderful life together. And with Ernie, it was really funny. Ernie and I used to have long arguments about the necessity for a punchline. I said, Ernie, you're so close. You just need a punchline. He said, no, I don't want to do punchlines. So anyhow, I convinced him, you got to do punchlines. So one night he's taping his show, and he said, you must come over. It was 11 o'clock. And I go over to ABC where he's taping, and he and Jolene are standing there next to a car. And Ernie put his hand on the hood of the car, and it went through the floor and crashed. And oh my God. And he said, now, is that a punchline? I said, yeah, Ernie, that's a punchline. All right.
But let's talk about Laugh-In now. It's truly one of the greatest comedic shows in television history, and it's still revered to this day. How did that come about?
Well, NBC had a Monday night was Lucy and Gunsmoke. They were the number 1 and 2 shows, gigantic ratings, and NBC had nothing to put on opposite. So they could I come up with something to put opposite Lucy and Gunsmoke? And they had no money, so I said, yeah, it was a great answer. If anybody asks you to do something, always say yes and then figure out what it is later. So I said yes. So I collected all of these young character people. They were not normal variety performers. There was, Goldie and Lily and Judy Garland and Joanne Worley. These were young character people, really. And we put them all together and then began taping. And the network looked at this collection of funny people doing funny things. None of it lasted more than 15, 20 seconds. And they said, but that's not a television show. I said, yeah. I said, it's the newest thing on the continent. They call it comedy verte. I made it up in the meeting, I make up a lot of my escapes. And I said, comedy verte. So he called it. He said, Erwin, did you ever hear of comedy verte? And Erwin, who was as corrupt as I was, said, yeah, it's new on the continent. I just made it up. So comedy verte became our word of short pieces of comedy. And we put it on, and the network didn't want to air it. They said, this is not a television show. This is crazy. I said, yeah, but it's a crazy, crazy television show. And so it went on, and nothing happened because there were no names on the show and no big guest stars or anything. And we would stop people in the hall and ask them to do the show, and they would turn us down. And them turning us down was what we would put on the show. John Wayne, I'm not going to do that show. Those crazy people. Tape it, put that on the air. And so that became Laugh-In. Laugh-In was a series of mistakes, a series of things that didn't fit anywhere else. And it was necessary at that point because nothing new had happened. Much like now, today. When you watch television today, what do you see that's new and fresh and with bright colors? You don't see bright colors on television today. And you don't hear people having a good time. Everything is loud and kind of angry. And Laugh-In was angry, but we were angry at people that everybody were angry with. So anyhow, that's kind of how I survived it.
And why did it change? When did it change to Rowan and Martin that they had to have their names ahead of the title?
Well, when you imagine today, this is 50, 60 years later, you went in to sell something that bizarre, that far out. And so Ed Friendly had a relationship with Timex, and he said, "You go into business with me, I can sell this show to Timex." That's how Ed and I teamed up. Went to see Timex, and they wanted a host. Well, the original concept for Laugh-In didn't have a host, but there were these two Rowan and Martin. And they did a very funny stand-up comedy act. They were older, and what they were doing was stand-up act, and there was no room for that really on Laugh-In, so we had them host the show and introduce things that, if you remember, really needed no introduction. But it was charming. They were great. Dick was kind of crazy, and Dan was kind of severe, and that helped hold the show together. So that's why it became Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. And we had a good time with them. They were never too sure what the show was, but then nobody was too sure what the show was. That was that was the secret.
It's so funny that you say that, because that was my experience. I watched it growing up, and it made sense to me as a child for some reason, and it was must-watch television in our household for sure.
The fact that it didn't make sense was what made it work. The fact that you waited to see what the hell are they going to do, and that thing about "don't go away, we'll be right back," dipping to black and coming back up. The network said, "You can't do that. You told the audience to tune out." I said, "No, I told the audience to come back." My fights with the network were part of the reason for its success. My arguments with the censors alone were absolute gold, because they never really understood it. And by the time the censors understood the joke, we had done it, and we were on to another joke that they couldn't understand. It sounds impossible today, but we had 6 censors on the show, and we put most of them in the home. And we would tape all hours of the night, and they had to go home and get some sleep. And we'd put it all together and run it for the network, who said, "We can't air this." So while we were discussing what they couldn't air, it already had gone on the air. And by the 3rd, 4th show, we were getting a 50 share. You cannot imagine what that is today. Today, a show gets a 5 or a 6. We had a 50 share. That meant half the people in the country were watching Laugh-In. And that kind of an audience. I mean, I'm arrogant now, but you can imagine me 50, 60 years ago. Whoa, boy.
Just on the censor thing, you meant in the book, you wrote that you managed to get a nipple on the air. Sneak that past them.
I've got to be careful about what I put in the book. We were taping all kinds of things out in the field, because we could shoot in the field, and we had sunlight, so we didn't need the lights on a stage. So we would just tape blackouts and things, and trapdoors, and people doing crazy things out in the open. And while we were shooting one thing at one end of the field, we were taping bits and pieces at the other end. And Judy Garland, who was an outrageous little British girl who was married to Burt Reynolds, there's always a problem keeping Judy's clothes on, because so anyhow, she was taping at one end of the field, and they painted petals on a nipple like a flower, and then they did a close-up of that. And I looked, I said, "Guys, that's a." So they said, "What?" I said, "What? You can't put that on." So we kept cutting it shorter and shorter, till finally the shot of Judy's nipple, which looked like a flower, lasted about 3 seconds. And the network said, "Hold it. That's a breast." And I said, where, what?" That's the kind of argument we had. I never understood the question. So they never understood the answer. But that's Judy Garland's nipple became a famous shot. And by the time they figured out what it was, we were a hit, and there was very little possibility of them telling me no to almost anything. It doesn't exist today. That kind of freedom, that kind of adventure does not exist today. Somehow or another, we've developed more rules and more restrictions. And when you look at television today, there's so much dark colors because it's easier to light. Our light were bright colors. Everything was a bright color. Everything happened by accident. Nothing lasted more than 4 or 5 seconds. I mean, and you were looking at an accident. You know, when you see an accident on the freeway, you see cars slow down to look at it. Nobody's happy that it happened, but everybody slows down to look at an accident. That was Laugh-In. Everybody slowed down to look at it because it was a very funny accident.
Talking about the cast, you mentioned Judy Garland. There's also legendary Ruth Buzzy, Artie Johnson, Joanne Worley. There were just so many.
And Lily Tomlin, Lily Tomlin was an adventure. Some of these people were young character people. Well, they were not singers, dancers, or whatever was on television variety at that point, but there was this group of people that didn't really have a home anywhere else. I mean, Lily Tomlin did like 6, 7 characters, and we do them all in one show. So only in this form where everything was so fast and cut together that didn't make sense. It wasn't supposed to make sense. You could use Lily Tomlin doing 4 or 5 characters all within one show. So we collected this group of young character people. They could sing and dance, but mostly they were outrageous. Artie Johnson did all of these characters. Lily Tomlin did so many characters. And Goldie was a delight. You just put Goldie on, and the trick with Goldie was to divert her attention so she'd get confused and then she'd laugh. Goldie perhaps was one of the most intelligent, brightest people I've ever worked with. But if you could direct her attention somewhere else, she thought that was funny and would laugh. And we made a big hit out of Goldie's laughing.
Was there anyone famous who auditioned that didn't make it?
Richard Nixon. Paul Keyes was right around laughing and was very friendly with Richard Nixon. So at the beginning of our second season, I said, we need to do something that's explosive because we were a hit, but nobody thought we could keep it up. I said, how about Richard? Paul Keyes says to me, I think I can get Nixon. I said, good, get him for me too. Anyway, I didn't like him, but he came on and he said, sock it to me. We wanted him to say sock it to me. He said, sock it to me. Mr. Nixon just kind of smiled. It's this comedy. It's new to me. Sock it to me. Take 2. Right? And so, so we put that on the air for the next show. And when people saw Richard Nixon appearing as a featured spot in a comedy show, it hit all the papers and it became very famous. And people said that perhaps helped get him elected. And I've kind of had to live with that.
Oh man. Well, you write in the book that you immediately knew the show would be a hit. What made you think that at first?
Well, no, I didn't know it would be a hit with the audience. I knew it would be a hit with the people on the show, and I was having the best time because anything that anybody came up with, we'd put it in the show immediately. And the immediacy of it and the political climate at that time was somewhat like what we have now. We had the Vietnam War and all of that stuff. And out of that kind of turmoil, out of that kind of disaster socially that was happening, comedy just flowered.
Well, how long did it take for the network to tell you that you were a hit?
Well, they never really accepted that we were a hit. They knew they were getting a 50 share, and they knew they were selling commercials for more than any other show on the air. But they kept saying, we can't do that. And I would have a meeting with them to discuss what we couldn't do, which of course was what we had just done, or which we were getting ready to do again. And when they started looking at the amount of money they were getting for commercials, their sense of propriety was bent a little bit. And so we got permission to do things that were unheard of before, and to put people on that were unheard of. I mean, Richard Nixon was not a comic. And John Wayne, I love John Wayne. But eventually, see, John Wayne telling us no became a guest shot. I'm not going to do that. Those people are crazy. I'm not going to do that show. But by the time he saw the reaction, eventually John Wayne came on the show dressed in a big blue bunny suit. And nobody could believe he did that. But it meant so much to the sale of his movies. And it meant so much for him to communicate with that younger audience that we got by with a lot. I'm looking for that kind of accident to happen again. We need it now. We need it now even more than we did then.
Well, I want to talk about Rowan and Martin. Could you discuss a little about them and how you wrote in the book how they started getting jealous basically of everything, each other, the cast, you?
Well, Rowan and Martin were good friends of mine. They did a very, very funny stand-up comedy act. And the show was not built originally to have a host. And so Rowan and Martin came in, and it worked because they were straight. Dan wore a tuxedo. Dick stood there, and Dick was confused. So we would have Dan and Dick talking, and it could go 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes sometimes. And then we would cut into that and say, meanwhile, in another part of town, and we'd cut to the cocktail party. So they were older than the rest of the cast. and they didn't really fit in this multiple character thing. Dan was so straight and so severe, and Dick was so silly, and we featured that, and that helped the show enormously. And they never really were great friends. They just did a very, very funny stand-up act, which was built upon Dick not understanding and Dan trying to be straight and correct Dick, and it worked.
Well, having worked with the great Betty Davis myself, I was absolutely awestruck in her presence, and she appeared on Laugh-In. What was she like that day?
Stunned. She came in, and when we worked with Betty Davis, we put Betty Davis together with Robin Williams. Now imagine, if you will, that combination. Robin Williams, another one of our accidents. I saw him on the street in San Francisco, barefoot in coveralls and with a straw hat, and he had a fishbowl out over the audience. He said, "I'm fishing for assholes." Well, put that on there. But so now we introduced Robin to Betty Davis, and she was in shock. She didn't know what to think, but she loved it. She absolutely loved Robin. You could not help but love Robin.
You have to ask at the end, what was the reason they gave for Laugh-In's cancellation?
Well, problems. The political climate changed, and there was the Vietnam War, and when anybody's having that much fun, the establishment decides you shouldn't be doing that. And the rating was huge, and but it was just presented so many problems with the censors and the sponsors, and it just became difficult to do, impossible to do. Today, I would love to see a show come on today that would break all the rules. We have new rules. We have new people, influencing us with those rules. Break those rules, and you can have a good time.
Were you ready for it to end, or were you ready, wanting to do more?
No, I see. When I was doing Laugh-In, with that kind of success came a certain privilege. So we came up with another show. They said, "What are you going to do now? Do something else." So I came up with a show called Turn On. Did you hear about Turn On?
Yes.
Turn On was the Laugh-In to the nth degree. It was shorter. We had all kinds of new electronics and new devices and new editing techniques. So we put that all together into a collection of unbelievable, even sometimes unacceptable moments. And Turn On was that. It was a mind-blowing experience. And what happened was, by the way, when we put Turn On the air, nobody was going to air it. But when they saw it, we got a commitment to do 13 shows, and that commitment was expanded to 17 shows. And we got 5 major national sponsors after they saw that first show. The commitment was for 13 shows, which they expanded to 17 shows. And I thought, hey, another breakthrough. And there was a guy in Cleveland who wanted to keep Peyton Place on. And he went on the air as our show aired. He went on the air calling stations all across the country. So one station after another, as it went west, began canceling the show. So by the time we went on the air, it had been canceled in California. And we couldn't believe it was canceled, because it was a major, major breakthrough television show, optically, visually, sound-wise, and everything. And but it was revolutionary. I'm proud of Turn On as I am of Laugh-In. Wow. It was all new people, new devices, new editing techniques that had not been seen before or even heard before. We didn't have any orchestra as such. We used a thing called a Moog synthesizer, which was synthetic sound. So we aired one show which got canceled halfway through, and then they were so convinced it was a hit that we signed to do 8 more scripts. I've got 8 scripts to Turn On, some brilliant stuff. But we got canceled, and part of my settlement to get paid for anything of the first show was I had to promise never to air it. And so it didn't air until now, when somehow some scoundrels managed to liberate those shows. And so there's a couple of them now that are running. And
they're on YouTube, a couple, yeah.
People look at it and they say, "What was the problem?" Well, even today it seems a bit progressive, hopefully.
Well,
Another advantage.
how did Real People come about?
Well, how do people come about in the first place? You know, somebody gets in bed and does something naughty. That's pretty much the way Real People happen. I had we did with the success of Laugh In and Turn On and some of the other specials we did, Cher and Goldie and Lily and Judy Garland and Dinah. We wanted to do another kind of a thing, and Herb Schlosser, a wonderful man who was president of NBC, who put up with a lot, but he also helped me get a lot of stuff on the air. He called me and he said, George, he said, we just taped the show in New York, and we used these new, what they called electronic, cameras, right? And ENG cameras. And he said, and we shot on the streets of New York. Could you do anything like that funny? And I said, let me call you back. I was skiing with Stein Erikson, which in itself is a reason for great laughter, you know? You think I'm funny here, you ought to see me on skis. So anyhow, I called him back and I said, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll do that. We'll use, and he said, well, you're going to do a pilot? I said, I can't do a pilot. I need to do at least a commitment for at least 6 so I can try this stuff out. And we went out and we just started taping Real People on the streets or wherever they were. And we put that together into this collection of bits and pieces and unbelievable characters and so on. There was a woman that was a newswoman in San Diego working with Regis Philbin, Sarah Purcell. We never even thought about anybody other than Sarah Purcell. She was at that point kind of a news weather girl, whatever. So we bring in Sarah, who was wonderful and warm and folksy, and she became the host of the show. And we went out and we found unbelievable, unpredictable, zany, crazy, funny people and put them all together into this one collection, which also included heroes and role models. And so in each show, we did a couple of hero stories, which now is the backbone of much of CNN. But people celebrated heroes, the Tuskegee Airmen and the Navajo Code Talkers. First time on television, because they were not things that had been publicized. There was no place for it. Real People opened a window for all kinds of characters and heroes and everybody to come on. And Real People was a huge hit, stayed on the air for a long time. It was a lot of fun to do because, again, there were no rules. And if you get rid of all the rules, you can have a lot of fun.
Well, I'd like to talk about a couple of the individual shows that you worked for and some experiences. Someone who I absolutely love, Cher. You worked on her show and talk about how she was resistant to a lot of the things that you wanted to do. Can you talk a little about that?
Well, Cher did an act with Sonny and Cher, and it was delightful. These two kind of rock and roll new people, and Cher was magical because Cher would have been a star telephone operator or a manicurist. She's so strange and weird, and she got great secrets and so forth. So we put them on, and it was again accident. We put them on, and they came on, and Cher was resistant to some of the things. See, she'd been in business with Sonny for a long time, and she was not going to let another man tell her what to do. And but I was telling her what to do, and I was right. And my powers of persuasion, I think, sometimes may have bordered on being not a bully would be the wrong word, but no, it might be the right word. But so it was Cher, and so I would convince Cher she had to do some of these things, and so she started calling me Hammer because I guess I was somewhat forceful in my persuasion. And she was always late because she was having her nails done. So I called her Nails, and she called me Hammer. And I had a delightful time with Cher. But it was not easy because she's super bright and resistant to a lot of things and resistant to another man telling her what to do. But we went on and we tried a lot of things with Cher. And she became she still is a huge, huge star. But unpredictable and not easy to convince, which is how I got the name Hammer. You can imagine my powers of persuasion.
Well, what about Judy Garland? How did you get involved with her and some of your experiences working with her?
You did read the book, didn't you? I heard that Judy Garland was going to do a show, and she was supposed to be unpredictable and unbelievable and whatever. And but the network knew they needed somebody to work with Judy Garland, and I wanted to meet her. And so they arranged a meeting, but I didn't know it was going to happen. It happened like 9 o'clock at night. I'd been there all day, and Mike Dan called me and said, "Why don't you come down to the office?" I come down to the office, and there is Judy Garland. You cannot imagine now. Here was this tiny little magnetic person sitting in this chair, and I was surprised. I didn't know what to say. So as with everything else in my life, accident popped in. So I said, "Miss Garland, I don't care what you may have heard about me. There's no truth to the rumor that I'm difficult." And she looked at me, she said, "You're difficult?" I said, "See, even you've heard it." So she said, "You're difficult?" She said, "So am I." "Really?" So we went out, and my first meeting with Judy Garland lasted maybe under 2 minutes. And from there, everything happened. Everything was magic. I mean, when she hit that stage, it was an explosion. I got fired because NBC, they wanted me to do with Judy Garland what I had done with Dinah Shore. Dinah was so warm, it just enveloped you, Judy was much more of an event. And the shows I did with Judy, we did 5 shows in 6 weeks, and all of them were events. Judy and Mickey Rooney, Judy and Eva. And the network said, "Wait a minute, we want you to do with Judy what you did with Dinah Shore." I said, "That's not Judy. Judy's much more special than that. You can't contain that." So anyhow, once again, accident, I got fired. They said they wanted Judy to be Dinah Shore. And eventually Judy and I wound up very, very good friends. But those 5 shows, they wouldn't air them in sequence because they were indeed high energy, volatile events. And when they did air, they won every awards and all that stuff. But I love Judy. It was an adventure. Everything was dangerous with Judy, but it was an adventure. It was fun. She was bigger than life.
Well, through the years, there have been so many stories about Milton Berle's behavior and other things. Your memoir confirmed everything. Could you share that story with us?
Well, there's the number. You can't really tell too many Milton Berle stories because some of them aren't really true. Milton Berle's physical properties were the subject of great conversation and almost legend. And if you weren't careful, Milton Berle would show you the reason for his legendary possessions. Milton was, you couldn't tell Milton anything. So when I came in with Milton, it was always a constant test, but he was funny. He was one of the great technicians, and he conducted the show from the stage. He'd go like this for the audience applause, and he'd cue everything. He grew up in burlesque, and he was endowed with a great sense of humor and also vast experience. So working with Milton was dangerous, but it was fun. Boy, I had a good time with Milton. My other one of my favorites was Robin Williams. Robin Williams was an accident. Robin Williams went to Juilliard, and Juilliard was this vast musical college, right? And Robin Williams in there, and he did 3 years, and they brought him in, and they said they didn't want him to come back because he was so explosive, and they said, "You didn't do anything wrong. It's just there's nothing more we can teach you." So that's when they sent Robin Williams out, and that's when I met him. And what an adventure Robin was. See, if we look for what the book is about, it's a book about what makes you laugh. This is what made me laugh. And fortunately, people are laughing about reading about my adventures, my misadventures, my mistakes, but Robin was an adventure, and as was all the other people. Richard Pryor was another accident, but you don't want. If I could give advice, I can't give advice. I'm not good doing advice to anybody. Certainly not intelligent people. My only advice to people is read Still Laughing and realize that you can take your mistakes and turn them into something funny and perhaps even sell a book or two. But Robin was one of my adventures, and Richard Pryor was another one, and Cher, and Lily Tomlin. Lily Tomlin was a delightful accident that happened. I saw her. She She was not happy. She was going back to New York. She was not successful in California. So she came into a meeting and she sat in the office. And as I'm watching this woman, she became 5 different people as we were talking. She became the telephone operator. She became a little girl. And so I wanted her to do the show. What kind of a show is she going to use all those people? I said, well, the way I tape, we can do all of them. And so sure enough, we would sit down with Lily and she would go into, excuse me, I must have swallowed something very strange. Anyhow, she would go in the makeup room and come out a whole different person. When she came out as Ernestine, the telephone operator, 1 ringy dingy, 2 ringy dingies, and she would call people, and people were terrified of getting a call from Ernestine or any one of the Lily characters, but Ernestine was one of my favorites. And right before she went to tape the first show, I said, Lily, when you dial with this finger. What? I said, dial with this finger. Don't give him a finger, but dial with this finger, and we'll know what you mean. So she called all of these people, and people were really afraid of getting a call from Ernestine, and they were afraid to turn it down. But Ernestine would call up. She called up William Buckley, Mr. Buckley. You never always said, why is it Buckley? I don't know. It was F was my favorite letter, So William Buckley, and then dial with this finger. And Lily became an institution. One of the brightest, funniest, most creative geniuses I've ever worked with was Lily. Goldie was another one. Joanne was a magnificent operatic voice, which we never really got a chance to do because that wasn't what we were doing. And Joanne, Judy Garland was an outrageous little girl, as I said, was married to Burt Reynolds. But I told you that. See, I told you, I'm 94, and I repeat myself. So
It's quite all right.
out. See, the good thing about the book, I could edit out everything that I did that I shouldn't have. So unfortunately, or fortunately, there are things that I should not have put in the book that I did put in the book. Some of those became the things that people said are their favorite parts. See, my life has been an accident from beginning to now, right? And even me lasting this long is an accident. There's no way I could have lived to be 94. I would have been shot or run over or something. And I made it to 94, and I may make it to 95, which may even go on in this interview. But we've got to seek adventures. We've got to look at failure not as an end, but as a stop on the journey towards success. It's always failure along the road, and certainly I had a lot of that, including this interview. For all I know, you may never want to hear this. I don't know what you're doing. Where are you now,
Oh, they will. They definitely will. But you mentioned Dinah Shore earlier, and you've got a fantastic story in your book about actors upstaging each other. What were the circumstances behind that?
Well, we booked Dinah was doing a show with Lucy, and they booked Diana Ross, and Dinah and Lucy were working with this young, hot Motown singer, and they kind of resented her age and her appearance. So they were these two very professional, school, learned, experienced performers found ways to upstage Diana Ross. And they would, when we rehearsed, and then when they go to do a take, they would back up one step, and Diana would turn around and look at them, and we got the side shot of her head. I said, Diana, do not watch these two women. They are evil. And these two, what did we do? What did we do? And they'd say, oh, you're so skinny, you're so young. Show us again. I said, Dinah, now stop it. And they were these two learned, experienced superstars found ways to upstage Diana Ross. The show went on the air. It was a pretty good show, but when you see it rerun, you'll see constantly Diana Ross turning her head to look at Dinah and Lucy. See, even that worked. Accident. We've got to look at accidents with joy and delight and anticipation, because how you recover from an accident is what can make it work. I'm disproving it in this interview, but maybe we'll do another interview when I can be more thought out and make more sense, and repeat myself, and then repeat myself less. But I said that before, didn't I? See what I'm telling you? Something happens with senility when we lose contact with reality. I told that before too. So anyhow, go ahead.
Well, what legacy do you feel Laugh-In has left?
The necessity for Laugh-In, and not to be careful of what you laugh at. When things are not to be laughed at, go for it, because that's what we need. That breaks the coil. You walk in, and pratfall is a dangerous, unhappy, painful experience. However, they're funny. So seek things that make us laugh, because it's the panacea. It's the thing that makes you feel it. A laughter, nothing feels better than a laugh. Well, some things feel better than a laugh, but at 94, you don't experience them with any kind of frequency. You know, they once said, if I get it up, I'd lean on it. But the experience of laughter is something to be sought.
We wanted to thank you. We wanted to thank you so much for coming on to talk to us. It's so many great stories in the book. It truly is one of the best showbiz memoirs that I've ever read. It's
well, thank you.
So fascinating. And like I said, there's so many great stories in there we couldn't cover, but I highly recommend everyone go out and get it. And we're going to put links to it when we post this. But it's really been a pleasure and an honor to get to speak with you.
Thank you very much. I've had a good time, and I hope you've had a good time too. And
most certainly, yes, absolutely.
Thank you for having me here.
Good. So this has been Pop Culture Retro. I'm Jonathan Rosen with Ike Eisenmann. And again, a very special thanks to George Schlatter. And please subscribe.
Thank you for listening to Pop Culture Retro, where no one was hurt during the making of this podcast.